Chapter 1. The Last Letter. The first letter arrived when Eleanor was 10. Her father, the Alpha of Thornvale, sat her down at the desk in his study and told her she was betrothed. The boy's name was Cedric. He was the Alpha King of Ashridge's son. They would marry when they were old enough, because their fathers had decided this before either of them could walk. And the alliance between Thornvale and Ashridge was older than both of them, and would outlast both of them, and that was that. "Write to him," her father said. "Be polite." Eleanor was 10. She did not want to be polite. She wanted to be outside. She picked up the pen and wrote, "Dear Cedric, my name is Eleanor. I am told we are to be married. I am also told I must write to you. I do not know what to say to someone I am going to marry when I am old, because I have never met you, and I do not know if you are nice or not. My father says your family is important. I have a dog named Biscuit. He is also important. Eleanor Locke." His reply arrived 14 days later. The handwriting was careful and slightly too large, the way a boy writes when he has been told that his penmanship matters and is concentrating very hard. "Dear Eleanor, thank you for your letter. I am also told we are to be married. I do not have a dog. I have a horse. His name is not Biscuit. I think Biscuit is a strange name for a dog, but I did not want to say so because my tutor told me to be diplomatic. This is me being diplomatic. Cedric Ashridge." She wrote back the same day. She had not been told to write back. She did it anyway. "Dear Cedric, Biscuit is an excellent name for a dog. Your horse not having a good name is not my problem. What is your horse's name? If it is something boring, I will not be surprised. Eleanor." "Dear Eleanor, his name is Thunder. I am aware that this is not a creative name. I was 7 when I named him. I have since improved. Cedric." "Dear Cedric, Thunder is a terrible name. I will write again when you have improved further. Eleanor." She wrote again 3 days later. She did not mention the improvement. She told him about the foxes that lived under the kitchen at Thornvale Hall, and how the cook hated them, and how Eleanor fed them scraps and the cook pretended not to know. He wrote back about the falconer at Ashridge who talked to the birds as if they could answer, and how one of them had once stolen a visiting dignitary's hat. She laughed. She did not tell him she laughed. They were 12 when she corrected his spelling for the first time. He had written receive, and she circled it in her reply and wrote I before E, Your Majesty, and he did not make the mistake again. He was 13 when he corrected her back. She had claimed that the River Ashwell ran east. It ran northeast. He included a hand-drawn map. It was surprisingly good. "Your geography needs work," he wrote. "Fortunately, my cartography is better than your sense of direction." "Your cartography is adequate," she replied. "Your humility is not." By 15, the letters had teeth. Not the childish kind, not the clumsy back and forth of 2 children who had been told to write and couldn't stop. Real teeth. She had learned to argue from her father, who ran one of the most powerful territories in the realm, and who argued the way other men breathed. Cedric had learned to argue from governing, because his father had died when Cedric was 14, and the crown had landed on a boy who was not ready for it, and who had become ready for it by force. The letters were the only place either of them could be loud. She wrote about the Thornvale Harvest Council and how the elders treated her like an ornament with opinions. He wrote about the border negotiations and how the Southern Territories sent envoys who smiled too much and said too little. She told him his trade policy was structurally naive. He told her Thornvale leather was structurally optimistic. She wrote back 4 pages. He wrote back 6. They never missed a week. At 17, she corrected his grammar in a letter about grain tariffs. He filed it, as he would later tell her, for further review. She called him infuriating. He called her relentless. She used the word infuriating 3 times in one letter, and the pen pressure changed on the 3rd. She was smiling when she wrote it. She would not learn for 8 more years that he noticed. At 20, the letters were devastating. Hers were sharp, political, precisely constructed arguments that dismantled his positions with the efficiency of someone who had been studying his rhetorical weaknesses for a decade and had kept notes. His were dry, stubborn, and annoyingly well argued, with a timing that was better on paper than any human beings had a right to be, and a habit of conceding minor points with such grace that you didn't notice he'd won the major ones until you reread the letter. They argued about border jurisdiction, water rights, ceremonial protocol, the structural integrity of Thornvale leather, whether his kingdom's constitutional framework was outdated, it was, and whether her father's territorial amendment superseded his second accord, it did. They argued about everything. They wrote every single week. They had never met. She hated the arrangement. She also packed every letter he had ever sent into an oak, iron-hinged box and annotated the margins in handwriting she never intended anyone to see. He hated the arrangement. He also wrote 7 drafts of every letter and sent the 7th because the first ones were too honest. Neither of them knew about the other's secret. They would both find out in the worst possible way. Now Eleanor was 25, sitting in a carriage rattling toward the Ashridge capital, and the letter she was holding was almost perfect. "Your Majesty," it began, which was already an insult because she'd been calling him Cedric since she was 19, and the sudden formality would land like a slap. "I write to inform you that I will be arriving at your capital within the week, at which point we will presumably begin the contractual obligation your household insists on calling a wedding. I have enclosed my measurements for the ceremonial gown, as requested. I have not enclosed my enthusiasm. It was not requested." In the trunk beneath the carriage seat, buried under 3 changes of clothes and a pair of boots she'd packed out of spite because of the structurally optimistic comment, there was the box. Oak, iron-hinged, every letter, every week, 15 years. Her wolf noted this without comment. Her wolf had stopped commenting on the box around year 6. "You reread the one about the grain tariff 3 times on the road," her wolf observed. Then, with the resigned patience of someone who has been right about everything for a decade, you highlighted it. She was not nervous. She was politically prepared. There was a difference, and it was important, and her wolf was not invited to weigh in on the distinction. She had been on suppressants since she was 16. That was the sensible choice for an omega daughter of an alpha, the responsible one, the strategic one. Manage the scent, manage the perception, manage the biology the same way she managed everything else. The 7th draft of her own body. "You packed the box," her wolf said. "I packed everything," Eleanor said aloud, to no one. Margot was asleep in the opposite seat, her mouth slightly open, her hat over her eyes, radiating the serene oblivion of a woman who had no letters to obsess over and no betrothed king to meet. "You packed the box first." Eleanor folded the letter. She would hand it to him in person. She would watch his face when he read it, because for 15 years she had been imagining the face that went with the handwriting. And in approximately 4 hours, she was going to find out if the real one matched. She was not nervous. She was furious. Well-dressed and 23 days away from marrying a man whose handwriting she could recognize at 40 paces, but whose face she had never seen. Her father had kissed her forehead at the gate and said, "Give him hell, Eleanor." She intended to. The capital of the Ashridge sovereignty was larger than she'd expected, which annoyed her, because Cedric had described it in letter 47 as adequate if you are not accustomed to scale. And she had assumed he was being characteristically dry, and that the city would be modest and gray and slightly disappointing, like the man himself presumably was. It was not modest. It was not gray. The palace sat on a ridge above the river, and it caught the late afternoon light in a way that made the stone look warm, almost alive, and the pennants along the outer wall moved in the wind with the kind of unhurried grace that suggested the entire kingdom had been designed to make visitors feel underprepared. "Oh," Margot said, awake now, hat pushed back, pressing her face to the carriage window. "Oh, that's... Eleanor, look at that." "I've seen palaces." "You've seen Thornvale Hall. That's a large house with ambitions." Margot turned to her. "Are you going to be like this the entire time?" "I am going to be politically composed and graciously neutral." "You look like you're about to bite someone." "That is my graciously neutral expression. Your father runs one of the most powerful territories in the realm, And you still look like you're auditioning for a siege. The carriage passed through the outer gate. Guards in gray and silver, courtyard stones worn smooth. The smell of the place hit her before anything else. Old pine, cold river water, smoke from a kitchen somewhere to the left. And underneath all of it, threaded through the stone and the air and the century of wolves who had lived inside these walls, the faintest trace of something she could not name. Her wolf lifted its head. Not a dramatic shift, not a surge, just attention. The way you notice a sound in a quiet room that you've been waiting for without knowing you were waiting. Interesting, her wolf said. The carriage stopped. A steward opened the door. Eleanor stepped out, spine straight, chin level, letter folded and tucked inside her sleeve like a weapon. She was the daughter of an alpha, and she had been trained since birth to enter a room as if she owned it, regardless of whose name was on the deed. She was introduced to 12 people whose names she immediately forgot, because Cedric Ashridge was standing at the top of the palace steps, and he was not what she had expected. She had expected large. He was large. She had expected composed. He was composed. She had expected the rigidity of a man who argued in paragraphs and used semicolons in personal correspondence. And that was there too, in his posture, in the measured way he descended the steps, in the careful distance he maintained as he offered his hand in the formal greeting. But his eyes were wrong. Not wrong as in flawed. Wrong as in, she had constructed a version of this man out of 15 years of ink and paper, and the version in her head had hard eyes, or cold eyes, or the kind of eyes that calculate before they see. These were warm, steady, looking at her with something that was not calculation, not assessment, not the managed political gaze she had braced for, something closer to recognition. And then his scent hit her. It was not subtle. It was not gradual. It was cedar and black tea and frost on wool, and it arrived like a door opening into a room she had been standing outside of for her entire life. Her wolf, which had been smugly quiet for the last 6 hours, went completely still. Not told you, not interesting, just still. The kind of still that meant something had landed in a place that didn't have words yet. Cedric's hand was extended. She took it. His fingers closed around hers, and she felt the contact travel up her arm and settle somewhere behind her sternum, warm and specific and entirely unwelcome. "Lady Locke," he said. His voice was lower than she'd imagined, quieter. The voice of a man who had been writing sharp arguments on paper for a decade because he didn't say sharp things out loud. "Your Majesty." She withdrew her hand, held his gaze, placed the folded letter into his palm in the same motion, smooth enough that the watching household might have mistaken it for a gift. Cedric looked at the letter, then at her, then back at the letter. "You brought this in person," he said. "I wanted to see your face when you read it." The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile, not quite. The ghost of something that, in a letter, would have been his driest, most devastating line, but in person was just a man being quietly, reluctantly delighted by someone he was supposed to resent. "Then I'll read it at dinner," he said, "where you can watch." Her wolf, from somewhere very far away, "Oh, you are in so much trouble." Eleanor smiled. It was not her graciously neutral smile. It was the one she'd learned from her father, the one that ended trade negotiations in Thornvale before they started. "I look forward to it," she said. She did not look forward to it. She looked forward to being alone in her room so she could press her hands over her face and deal with the fact that Cedric Ashridge smelled like the answer to a question she had been refusing to ask for 15 years. And she was on suppressants. She was on suppressants and he still smelled like that. The suppressed version of her had still reacted like this. Her wolf filed this information without commentary, which was the most alarming thing her wolf had ever done. Chapter 2. The 30 Days. Cedric read the letter at dinner as promised. He read it silently, at the head of the table, while Eleanor sat 4 seats away and pretended to be interested in the soup. He did not give her the satisfaction of a visible reaction. His eyes moved across the page with the same steady pace he used for treaty clauses and grain reports. And when he reached the end, the devastating final line about contractual obligations dressed in flowers, he folded it, placed it beside his plate, and picked up his spoon. Then he looked at her. "Structurally optimistic," he said. Eleanor stared at him. "I beg your pardon?" "Your letter. It's structurally optimistic. You assume I'll be wounded by formality, which tells me you've been using my first name for long enough that you've forgotten it was ever a choice." "He is doing the thing," Flint observed. "The thing where he pretends he is composed and his heartbeat is doing something entirely different." Cedric had been pretending he was composed since approximately 3:47 that afternoon, when Eleanor Locke had stepped out of a carriage and smelled like winter mint and warm paper and the inside of a library he had never visited but somehow already knew. She was on suppressants. He could tell because the scent had the particular quality of something held back, something that arrived through a filter, as if he were hearing a voice through a closed door, and it was still the most beautiful voice he had ever heard. Flint had not been subtle about it. "Again," Flint had said when she took his hand. Just that. Not an observation, not a command, just the word, arriving like a stone dropped into still water. Again. 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 Cedric had spent the subsequent 4 hours in his study pretending to work, while Flint catalogued her scent with the obsessive precision of someone who had been waiting for this specific data point for 15 years and intended to memorize it at the molecular level. Winter mint, warm paper, the edge of something like... No, closer. Not paper. Parchment. And underneath... "Stop," Cedric had said to his empty study. "I will not," said Flint, with the pure, uncomplicated earnestness of a wolf who had absolutely no idea he was being unreasonable. "This is her managed," Flint had added, quieter. "This is what she smells like through suppressants. We are not equipped for the alternative." Now, at dinner, Cedric was managing. He was a king. He managed. This was what he did. Eleanor was watching him from 4 seats away, and her eyes were gray and sharp and furious about something he couldn't identify, and her scent had shifted since the courtyard, warmer now, threaded with something that might have been anger, or might have been the thing that hides behind anger when the person feeling it isn't ready to call it anything else. "She changed," Flint noted. "The mint is stronger. She's..." "I know," Cedric said, quietly enough that Harris, seated to his left, only raised one eyebrow. Harris had been raising one eyebrow at Cedric since they were 14. It was his most versatile form of communication. "How was the letter?" Harris asked. "Devastating." "Naturally. Will you be replying?" "I am eating soup." "That's not a no." It was not a no. Cedric would be replying. He would go to his study after dinner and draft 7 versions, each slightly less honest than the one before, and send the 7th, because the first would have included the word beautiful, and he was not, after 15 years of careful argumentation, going to hand her that ammunition in week 1. The next morning they were required to walk the palace grounds together, protocol for the betrothed pair, observed by a minimum of 3 household witnesses, performing the public version of acquaintance. She walked beside him, and she did not soften the pace for decorum. She walked like the daughter of an alpha, like someone who was used to covering ground and did not see any reason to slow down for a king, even this one, even when the king in question had 6 inches on her and was used to people adjusting their stride to match his. "Your gardens are aggressive," she said. Cedric looked at the gardens. They were roses. They're roses. Aggressively arranged. Everything is symmetrical. It's unsettling, like being watched by topiary. I'll have the groundskeeper notified that his hedges are intimidating the alpha of Thornvale's daughter. She almost smiled. He saw it, the way her mouth started to curve before she caught it and pressed it flat. In a letter, he wouldn't have seen it. In a letter, he would have gotten the controlled version, the edited line, the version of Eleanor that had been refined across 17 rewrites. This Eleanor was faster, funnier, less precise, and more devastating because of it. "You're quieter than your letters," she said. "You're louder than yours." Louder. "You have more pauses on paper. You build to the devastating line. In person, you just say it." She looked at him. Something in her expression shifted, not softer, not warmer, just recalculating, as if she had a version of him in her head and the real one was slightly to the left of where she'd placed him. "You've been analyzing my rhetorical structure." "I've been reading your letters for 15 years. I've had time." "Touch her hand," Flint said. Cedric did not touch her hand. "Now, please. Just the fingers, the edge of her." "Tell me about Thornvale," Cedric said, because if he listened to Flint for one more second, he was going to do something undignified in front of 3 household witnesses. She told him about Thornvale. She told him about her father's territory, the leather trade and the northern border disputes, and the winter festival where the entire pack burned an enormous straw wolf and everyone pretended it wasn't deeply weird. She told him about growing up as the Alpha's daughter, about learning to read a room before she could read a book, about the specific exhaustion of being raised to lead and then betrothed to someone else's kingdom before she turned 6. She told him this last part with a perfectly straight face, and Cedric laughed before he could stop it. A real laugh, not the measured half-smile he used in court. And Eleanor stopped walking. "What was that?" she said. "What was what?" You made a sound." "I laughed." "You don't laugh in your letters." It is difficult to convey laughter through semicolons. She was looking at him the way she'd looked at the letter last night, as if she was reading something and finding the real thing underneath the first version. Her scent spiked, winter mint, bright, almost sharp, and Cedric felt Flint surge forward like a tide coming in. Not a takeover, not a separate entity asserting control, just the animal part of him, the part that tracked her breathing and catalogued the exact distance between his hand and hers, 11 inches, then 9, then 7 as the path narrowed between the hedgerows, rising to the surface of his skin. His eyes shifted, just for a second, gold flashing through the brown. He felt it happen and could not stop it. Eleanor saw it. She saw it and she did not step back. She looked at his eyes with an expression he could not decode, curiosity and alarm, and something underneath both that her wolf probably knew the name of even if she didn't. "Your eyes," she said. "I'm aware." "Does that happen often?" "Only when someone insults my topiary." She laughed. It was not the controlled sound of a woman managing her public composure. It was quick and surprised and real, and it hit Cedric in the chest like a physical thing. And Flint said, "Home," in a voice so quiet Cedric almost missed it. "Home," Flint said again. Not about the palace, not about Ashridge, about her. Cedric put his hands behind his back and continued walking, and did not think about what Flint had just said. He thought about grain tariffs. He thought about border patrol rotations. He thought about absolutely anything other than the fact that Eleanor Locke had a laugh that sounded like the first warm day after a long winter, and that his wolf had just used the word home about a woman he had known in person for less than 24 hours. The 30 days continued. They argued about the wedding ceremony. She wanted it short, he wanted it traditional. They compromised on traditional, but with her revisions to the vows, which were savage. They argued about the living arrangements. She would not share his wing until she was ready. And ready was not a date on a calendar. It was a feeling she would identify when she had it. They argued about whether the Ashridge household had the authority to dictate her wardrobe, a debate she won in 4 sentences so precise that Cedric had to leave the room to recover. Margot reported on all of this with the diligence of a war correspondent. "He looked at your hands today," Margot said on day 4, sprawled across Eleanor's bed while Eleanor pretended to read. "Twice during the treaty review. Both times when you were gesturing. You were supposed to be taking notes on the betrothal terms." "I was. The terms were your betrothed staring at your hands like he'd never seen fingers before. It was the most interesting thing that's happened in diplomacy this century." "He was not staring at my hands." He was staring at your hands and then he wrote something down, and I would bet my inheritance it was not about grain. Eleanor turned a page she had not read. Your inheritance is a goat farm. It's a prestigious goat farm, and he was staring. He was staring. Eleanor knew this because she had been staring back, and the mutual pretense that neither of them was staring had become the most exhausting exercise of the entire arrangement. By day 6, they had developed a rhythm. Morning walks in the garden, required, witnessed. Afternoon sessions reviewing the marriage terms, required, increasingly combative. Evenings at dinner, required, agonizing. Because by evening his scent had settled into the warm, end-of-day version of itself, and Eleanor's wolf kept track of the shift with the quiet, devastating precision of someone cataloging evidence. Cedar is stronger after midday, her wolf noted on day 7. The tea fades. What's left underneath is just him. I am not tracking his scent schedule. You noticed the shift before I said anything. Eleanor did not dignify this with a response. On day 8, they argued about border jurisdiction during the afternoon session. Cedric quoted a precedent from the Second Territorial Accord. Eleanor quoted a counter-precedent from the Thornvale Amendment, one her father had drafted, which predated his by 40 years, and superseded it on 3 separate points. Cedric paused, looked at her. His eyes did the thing, the tightening that wasn't annoyance but lived in the same neighborhood. You came prepared, he said. I've been prepared since I was 15. You've been quoting the wrong accord for 3 years. I corrected it in letter 62. You ignored the correction. I didn't ignore it. I filed it for further review. You filed a valid legal precedent, drafted by my father, ratified by 3 territories, for further review. I was 17. My further review process was not yet refined. Margot, who had no business being in the room, but who had developed a supernatural ability to appear wherever the arguments were most entertaining, caught Eleanor's eye from behind a pillar and mouthed, "He's flirting." He was not flirting. He was being constitutionally incorrect about the Thornvale Amendment, and Eleanor was going to demonstrate this with such thoroughness that his grandchildren would know the proper precedent order. But his mouth had done the almost curve again, the one she'd started watching for, and Flint was doing something to Cedric's posture that made him lean forward an inch, and Eleanor's wolf had noted the lean with the bland satisfaction of a creature who was keeping score. That's 4 involuntary leans this week, her wolf observed. He doesn't know he's doing it. By day 10, the touch ledger had exactly 1 entry, the handshake at the courtyard on day 1. Cedric maintained a precise distance, never closer than arm's length in public, never closer than a desk width in private. He was meticulous about it. This meticulousness told Eleanor more than any letter he had ever written. A man who didn't care wouldn't measure. On day 11, she was making a point about the ceremonial procession route, something about the east gate being structurally dubious and the entire wedding party plunging into the river. And she stepped forward to jab her finger at the map on his desk, and he stood up at the same moment, and they were suddenly close enough that she could feel the heat coming off his chest. She stopped. He stopped. His scent was everywhere. Cedar and black tea, and the warm animal thing underneath that was not a cologne or a choice, but just him. The version of him that existed below the measured voice and the careful arguments and the semicolons. The real one. Neither of them moved. You could just, Flint began. The east gate, Cedric said, very quietly, was reinforced last spring. Eleanor looked at him. Her eyes were gray and her lips were parted, and the distance between them was approximately nothing. Then the wedding party will survive, she said. Presumably. She stepped back. He sat down. The map was still between them, and neither of them had looked at it for the last 30 seconds. I should go, Eleanor said. Yes. She left. He put his head in his hands. You were looking at her mouth, Flint observed. I was looking at the map. You have never once looked at a map the way you were looking at her mouth. Harris, who had been standing in the doorway for the last 45 seconds and had the decency to look only slightly entertained, said, "Should I cancel your afternoon?" "Why would you cancel my afternoon?" "You seem occupied." "I am not occupied. I am governing." "You are sitting at your desk with your head in your hands because a woman stood near you." She was making a valid point about the East Gate. She was standing close to you and you forgot how to be a person. Cedric removed his head from his hands. Cancel the afternoon. Chapter 3. The Drafts. On day 16, Eleanor went looking for a book. This was technically true. She was looking for a specific volume on territorial water rights that Cedric had referenced in letter 112 with the smug certainty of a man who assumed she hadn't read it. She had not read it. She intended to read it tonight, demolish his argument in the morning, and watch his face do the thing it did when she was right. The almost imperceptible tightening around his eyes that in anyone else would be annoyance, but in Cedric Ashridge was the closest he came to admitting he was impressed. His study was on the second floor of the East Wing. She knew this because she had been paying attention. She had also been told 3 times that the king's study was private, which Eleanor took as confirmation that the book was there. The study was unlocked. The book was on the 3rd shelf, exactly where she'd expected. She pulled it out, turned to leave, and knocked a stack of papers off the edge of the desk with her elbow. She knelt to pick them up. The top page was in his handwriting. The handwriting she had memorized without meaning to, the slightly left-leaning script that got smaller when he was being careful and larger when he was being honest. It was a letter. To her. Dated 3 years ago. "Eleanor," it began. Not Lady Locke, not to my betrothed. Just her name. "I have been drafting this letter for 6 days now, and I keep arriving at the same problem, which is that the thing I want to say to you is not the kind of thing that survives being put into writing. Once I send it, it becomes a document, something you could hold up as evidence of a position I am not yet sure I am prepared to defend. The thing is this. I think about the version of us that chose each other willingly. I think about it more often than a man betrothed by obligation has any right to. I think about what your voice sounds like when you are not trying to wound me. I imagine it is devastating. I imagine a great many things about you that would constitute a significant security vulnerability if you ever became aware of them. I am not sending this letter. I am writing it because the act of writing to you is the only honest thing I do in any given week, and this is the most honest I have been in a long time. Cedric." Eleanor sat on the floor of his study with the letter in her hands and did not move. There were more. Underneath. A stack of them, unsent, undated or dated months apart, written on the same heavy paper he used for the letters he did send, the ones she received. The sharp ones, the dry ones, the ones that argued brilliantly about trade policy and border law, and whether Thornvale leather was, in fact, structurally sound. Those were the letters she got. These were the ones she didn't. I wonder if you know that your 3rd paragraph is always the one where you stop performing and say something real. I have been reading your 3rd paragraphs for 7 years, and they are the best writing I have ever encountered in any context, including constitutional law. You called me infuriating in your last letter. You used the word 3 times. The 3rd time, the pen pressure changed. You were smiling when you wrote it. I'm certain of this. I have no evidence. I am certain. I would very much like to know what winter mint smells like. You grew up in Thornvale. I assume it grows wild there. I assume you have been surrounded by it your entire life, and that it is in your hair and on your skin, and I assume nothing about this is appropriate for me to be thinking, and I am writing it down anyway because you will never read this. There was one from when he was 19. The handwriting was younger, slightly less controlled. The lines were closer together, as if he'd been writing fast and not stopping. I read your letter about the Harvest Council, the one where you said the elders in Thornvale treat you like an ornament with opinions and you are tired of being decorative. I read that paragraph 4 times. I wanted to write back, "They are wrong, and you are more than an ornament. And I have never met you, but I know the shape of how you think, and it is not decorative, it is architectural. You build arguments like buildings. You build them to stand." I didn't send this. I sent the one about the fishing quota. And underneath that, dated 3 months later, "I think I am in considerable trouble. I have been corresponding with a woman I have never met for 4 years, and I have reached the point where her handwriting arriving on my desk is the best part of my week. This is an unreasonable position for a king to be in. I am in it regardless." Note to self, do not use the word luminous. You wrote luminous in the first draft. You are better than luminous. You are a king, not a poet. And she would eviscerate you for it. She would be right. The handwriting got larger in the later letters, more honest, less careful. She read them all. When she reached the bottom of the stack, she sat for a long time with the last one in her lap. It was dated 6 months ago. Just 2 lines. "I have agreed to the wedding. I am told you have too. I would like it to be real. I am aware that this is not what you signed." Her wolf was quiet, not smug, not vindicated, not performing the satisfaction of being right. Just present. Sitting with her in the silence of his study while the version of Cedric she had built over 15 years, sharp, careful, managed, dissolved and reformed into something she had not been prepared for. The one about the Harvest Council. That was the one that undid her. Because she remembered writing that paragraph. She remembered sitting at her desk in Thornvale, 17 years old, furious about being patronized by men who had less than half her policy knowledge. Men who deferred to her father, but treated her like a decorative extension of his authority. And she had written it without thinking and sent it without editing, and never known that someone on the other end was reading it 4 times and calling her architectural. She picked up the one about her 3rd paragraph, read it again, put it down, picked up the one about winter mint. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she could not make them stop, and she did not try. What she felt was not anger. It was the thing that comes after anger, when the armor you've been maintaining for 15 years turns out to have been protecting you from something that wasn't a threat. "You already knew," her wolf said, gently for once, without the smugness. Eleanor put the letters back in the stack. She placed them on the desk where she'd found them. She left the study with the water rights book under her arm and went to her room and sat on the bed and pressed her hands over her face and breathed. She did not cry. She was not a crier. She was her father's daughter, a woman who wrote devastating letters and won arguments and packed every response in an iron-hinged box and annotated the margins because that was the only place she could be honest. She sat there for a long time. Then she picked up a pen and did not write a letter. She couldn't. Not now. Not when she knew what he sounded like when he was telling the truth. Margot found her 2 hours later, still sitting on the bed, the water rights book unopened on the pillow beside her. "You look like you've been hit by something," Margot said from the doorway. "I found his drafts." Margot came in and closed the door. She sat on the edge of the bed, tucked one leg under herself, and waited with the patient attention of someone who had been Eleanor's person since they were 12 and knew when to push and when to just be in the room. "The unsent letters," Eleanor said. "The ones he wanted to send. They're not sharp. They're not argued. They're honest." "He said my 3rd paragraphs are the best writing he's ever encountered." Eleanor pressed her hands against her knees. "Including constitutional law." Margot processed this. That is either the most romantic thing a man has ever written, or the most tragic admission about the quality of his kingdom's constitution. "Margot, I'm being supportive. Continue." "He's been in love with me since he was 19. He used the word luminous and then crossed it out." "He crossed out luminous?" "He said he was better than luminous." "Was he?" Eleanor thought about the rest of the drafts, the one about the Harvest Council, the one about her voice, the one that was just 2 lines. I have agreed to the wedding. I would like it to be real. Yes, she said. He was much better than luminous. Margot looked at her for a long moment. Then she reached over and squeezed Eleanor's hand, briefly, without ceremony, and said, So what are you going to do? Eleanor didn't answer. She didn't know yet. She only knew that the version of Cedric she had been fighting for 15 years didn't exist, and the real one was someone she was not prepared to fight at all. Chapter 4. The Box. Cedric found the box on day 21. He was not looking for it. He was looking for Eleanor, who had been avoiding him for 5 days with the surgical precision of a woman who had been raised by an alpha and had learned evasion as a survival skill long before she'd learned it as a social one. She attended the required joint appearances. She sat at the required distance during meals. She answered his direct questions with the exact number of words necessary to constitute a response, and not one syllable more. Something had changed, and he did not know what. She's angry, Harris said. She's always angry. This is different. Different how? Cedric considered. She's not arguing. She argues when she's angry. When she stops arguing, she's something else. Hurt, Flint said. She smells like hurt. Cedric had been trying not to track her scent. This had been spectacularly unsuccessful because Flint treated her scent the way a compass treats north, not as a choice but as a physical law. The mint is sharper. She is carrying something. Go to her. On day 21, Cedric went to her rooms to ask directly what he had done. She was not there. The rooms were tidy, lived in only at the edges, a book on the nightstand, a shawl over the chair, a pen on the writing desk with the cap off. And on the desk, beside the pen, a box. Oak. Iron hinged. The kind of box you make to hold something you intend to keep. He opened it the way you open a door when you already know what's on the other side but haven't accepted it yet. His letters. All of them. Every one. 10 years of correspondence, sorted chronologically, each letter unfolded and pressed flat. The paper was soft at the edges from handling. Some of the folds were worn white. She had read them more than once. And in the margins, her handwriting, small and sharp and devastating. Next to his formal opening of letter 7, he started using my name here. He doesn't know he started. Next to his argument about northern trade routes in letter 34, he used the subjunctive. He only does that when he's unsure. He's never unsure about trade routes. He was unsure about something else when he wrote this. Next to his dry observation in letter 51 that Thornvale leather, whatever its other qualities, does not appear designed to survive weather. I laughed. I hate that I laughed. His timing is better on paper than any human being's has a right to be. Next to the closing of letter 89, in which he had written, I trust you will respond with your customary precision, I almost replied honestly. I wrote it. Then I burned it and sent the other one. Next to letter 94, where he'd mentioned the Palace Library's collection of historical maps, he is trying to make me want to visit. It's working. I will die before admitting this. And next to letter 112, the water rights argument, in handwriting that was slightly larger than the rest, as if she'd forgotten to be careful. This is the closest he has come to asking me a real question. He doesn't know how to ask a real question. He asks them sideways, inside arguments, and I am the only person who notices. I notice every time. Cedric sat in the chair beside her desk. He read every margin note. He read them the way he read her letters, carefully, repeatedly, looking for the third paragraph where she stopped performing and said something real. In Eleanor's margins, every paragraph was the third paragraph. She had been honest here, in the space between his lines, in the place she never expected him to see. The one about his timing. That was the one that got him. Because he could see it. Eleanor in Thornvale, the Alpha's daughter, alone at a desk in her father's hall, reading his throwaway line about leather, and laughing despite herself, and being furious about the laughter. He could see her writing, "I hate that I laughed," and meaning it and not meaning it, and both at once. And the precision of it, the way she annotated her own emotions as if they needed to be filed and cross-referenced, was so entirely, devastatingly her that Cedric's throat closed. She kept them, Flint said. Not with wonder, with a kind of stricken certainty. She kept all of them. She annotated them, Flint added, quieter. She treated your letters the way you treated hers, as if they were important, as if you were important. Cedric closed the box. He sat with it for a moment longer. Then he left it exactly where he found it, because it was hers, every annotation, every margin, every carefully preserved fold, and he had no right to it except the right she might choose to give him. She was in the library. She saw his face and knew. "You read them," she said, not a question. "You kept them." "You kept drafts." The room was empty except for them. Afternoon light through tall windows, the smell of old paper and dust, and, underneath, the unbearable specificity of each other, cedar and mint, black tea and warm parchment, the animal undercurrent of two wolves in a room together who had spent 15 years knowing each other through ink and were now, finally, in the same space and unable to pretend that ink was enough. "The real ones were too honest," he said. "So were my margins." Silence. Not the silence of two people with nothing to say. The silence of two people who have too much to say and no version of it that feels safe enough to go first. "Your third paragraphs," Cedric said. "The ones where you stop performing." "What about them?" "They're the reason I kept writing." He paused. The managed voice had dropped away. What was left was lower, raw, the voice of a man who had run out of seventh drafts. "They're the reason I wrote the drafts. Because your third paragraphs made me want to write something as honest as what you were accidentally giving me. I never managed it. The closest I got were the letters I couldn't send." Eleanor felt the crack. Not a break, a shift, the thing she'd been holding together since she read his unsent letters in his study 5 days ago. The defense mechanism, the sharpness, the precision, the devastating opening lines, shifting under the weight of a man who had been paying attention to her with a specificity she hadn't known was possible. Not her arguments, not her wit, her third paragraphs, the ones she didn't even know she was writing differently, the ones where the real Eleanor leaked through the performance. He had been reading her better than she read herself. "You wrote about my voice," she said. Her own voice was not steady, and she did not try to make it steady. "Yes." "You've heard my voice now." "Yes." "And?" Cedric looked at her. His eyes were warm and completely unmanaged, and Flint was so quiet that Cedric could hear his own heartbeat in the silence. "It's worse than I imagined," he said. "I imagined devastating. It's—" He stopped, swallowed. The managed mode was gone, and what was left was a man standing in a library with no draft to hide behind. "It's the only thing in this palace I want to listen to. I have rescheduled a border summit because your letter arrived, and I could not concentrate on foreign policy while your handwriting was sitting on my desk unread. I am making a very poor case for my competence as a sovereign." "You're making a very good case for something else," Eleanor said, and her voice cracked on the last word. And she let it, because she was done being the edited version. The distance between them was 3 feet, then 2. Cedric took a step toward her, and she did not step back, and the air between them was charged with 15 years of paper and ink and the specific, devastating reality that the person on the other end of every letter was right here, real, close enough to touch. And then Cedric stopped. She watched it happen. The moment the rawness became too much, and the other version of him, the managed one, the careful one, the king who drafted 7 letters and sent the safest, rose up and took over. Not dramatically, not with a flinch, just a stillness that settled across his shoulders, a slight straightening. The warmth in his eyes didn't vanish. It was worse than that. It went behind something. "We should discuss this properly," he said. His voice was level, measured. "After the wedding, when the terms are settled." Eleanor stared at him. After the wedding. As if what had just happened between them was a clause to be negotiated. As if 15 years of letters and drafts and margins could be tabled for later review, like his further review process for the Thornvale Amendment, filed and deferred because the honest version was too much to send. The 7th draft. He had given her the 7th draft. "Discuss it properly," she repeated. "There are considerations. The betrothal is a political arrangement between our families. Your father's alliance with Ashridge depends on—" "Don't." Her voice was quiet, not sharp. Quiet was worse. "Don't use my father to manage this." Cedric's mouth closed. "You just told me I'm the only thing in this palace you want to listen to," Eleanor said. "And then you filed it. You filed it under considerations." He said nothing. His jaw was set. His hands were at his sides. Flint was pressing against every surface of his composure, desperate and earnest and furious, and Cedric was holding him back the same way he'd been holding back the first drafts for 15 years, with precision and practice and a fear so bone deep he had built an entire governing style around never having to feel it. "The letters were braver than you," Eleanor said. "Not cruelly, worse, sadly." She left the library. She did not look at him on her way out, because if she looked at him, she would say something she could not take back. And she was done. She was so tired of being the honest one on paper and the composed one in person, and she was done. Margot was waiting in the corridor. She took one look at Eleanor's face and fell into step beside her without asking a single question, which was the kindest thing Margot had ever done and the thing that finally broke the composure. Eleanor's eyes burned. She did not cry, but the not crying was a near thing, closer than it had been in years, and she walked faster to stay ahead of it. In her rooms, she sat at the desk and looked at the iron-hinged box. Every letter, every margin, every honest thing she'd ever written about a man who couldn't be honest back when it counted. Her wolf was silent, genuinely silent, not the smug, all-knowing quiet of a creature who was waiting to say, "Told you so." The deep silence of an animal that had watched its human get hurt and didn't have a quip for it. "He's afraid," her wolf finally said, hours later, in the dark. "I know he's afraid. That's not an excuse." "No, it's not." "Then what is it?" Her wolf considered. "It's the reason you wrote 112 letters to a man you'd never met and kept every one he wrote back. You were afraid too. You sent the 7th drafts, too." Eleanor stared at the ceiling. The mint and parchment smell of her own rooms was too quiet. The cedar was missing. She noticed the absence in a specific physical way, like pressing on a bruise to check if it still hurt. It still hurt. Cedric stood in the library for a long time after she left. "What did you do?" Flint said. Not a question, an indictment. Cedric sat down heavily in the chair where Eleanor had been sitting. It smelled like winter mint. He closed his eyes. "The prudent thing," he said. "The wrong thing. Those are sometimes the same." "Not this time," Flint said. "Not with her. Never with her." Harris, standing in the doorway with the resigned expression of a man who had watched his king make a great many decisions and had never seen him get one this wrong, said nothing. He didn't need to. His eyebrow said everything. Chapter 5. The Wedding. Cedric did not write her a letter. He had tried. 6 drafts, each one worse than the last, because for the first time in 15 years, the distance between what he wanted to say and what he could safely write was not a gap he could manage with semicolons and careful structure. The truth was too large for a letter. It had outgrown the page. On day 22, he stopped writing. He started showing up. Not with explanations, not with the managed version of himself. He showed up to the garden bench where she read in the mornings and sat at the other end and didn't speak. He brought her the water rights book she'd borrowed, the real one, from his study, with a note tucked inside that was not a letter. Just a sentence. You were right about the Thornvale Amendment. You have been right about the Thornvale Amendment since letter 62. She did not respond. He left the book and went. On day 23, he stopped referring to the wedding as an arrangement. He stopped using the word terms. When Harris asked about the ceremony, Cedric said, "Ask Eleanor what she wants." And the use of her first name, in front of staff, without the title, without the distance, was deliberate. Good, Flint said. Not the surge of the first days, quieter now. The earnest register dialed down to something that sounded almost like patience, like a wolf who understood that the thing he wanted could not be claimed but only earned. Better, again. On day 24, Cedric went to Eleanor's rooms. She was at the writing desk. The iron-hinged box was beside her, closed. "You've been showing up," she said, without turning around. "Yes." "That's not the same as talking." "I know. I came to talk." She turned. She looked at him, really looked, the way she looked at his letters when she was searching for the third paragraph, the honest one, the one that cost him something to write. "Then talk." Cedric stood in the doorway. He did not enter. He did not perform. He was in none of his modes, not managed, not political, not the careful version of himself he had spent 15 years constructing in his letters. He was just standing there, undone, and for the first time in their acquaintance, he did not have a better line. "I was afraid," he said, "in the library. I was afraid of wanting you, of being in the same room as you and not being able to draft 7 versions of what I mean and send the safest one." He paused. His voice was raw, not low, not composed, just bare. "On paper, I can be anyone. I can be the man who writes well enough that you might believe he's worth marrying. In person, I'm quieter than your letters," she finished. "In person, I am the man who had 15 years to learn how to be honest with you and spent every single one of them editing." His hands were at his sides, not clasped, not composed, just there. Flint was very still, very present, and Cedric could feel the wolf's attention focused on Eleanor with the absolute clarity of an animal that had decided something and would not be undecided. "Stay," Flint said, not to Cedric, to her, as if the wolf believed she could hear him. "Please, stay." "You've been writing me honest letters for 15 years and never sending them," Eleanor said. "And the first time it mattered, the first time it was real, in person, with no paper between us, you filed it under considerations." "Yes." "That's not good enough." "I know." "Then prove it." She did not ask it gently. She asked it the way she wrote her letters, with the expectation that he would meet her or she would leave. Not because she was cruel, because she had spent 15 years being the honest one, and she was tired of carrying it alone. "I don't want to discuss this after the wedding," Cedric said. "I don't want to discuss it at all. I want to say it badly, right now, the first draft version, the one I would have burned." "Then say it." "This marriage is not a treaty. It stopped being one the first time you corrected my grammar in a letter about grain tariffs. You were 17, I was 19, and I have not recovered." He took a breath. "I am not marrying you because your father and my father shook hands before we were born. I am marrying you because I have been falling in love with your handwriting for 15 years, and I would like to know if you are as devastating in person as you are on paper." He paused. "You are. You are worse. You are so much worse, and I want this. I want this in a way that is not manageable, and I am done managing it." Silence. Eleanor looked at him. He was standing in the doorway of her room, with no composure and no distance and no 7th draft, and his eyes were doing the gold thing, and he wasn't trying to stop it. "You used the word devastating," she said. "I am aware. You never use it in your letters." "I was saving it." "For what?" For this. He was not performing. She could see it, the absence of the layer that usually sat between Cedric and the world, the managed version, the king who weighed every word. This was the man underneath, the one who wrote drafts he couldn't send and crossed out luminous and read her third paragraphs 4 times. "Prove it," she said again. Not a demand this time, an invitation. The simplest, most honest thing she had said to him since she arrived, and it cost her more than every devastating letter she had ever written. Cedric stepped into the room. He raised one hand, slowly, as if giving her time to stop him, as if the distance between his hand and her face was the most important distance he had ever crossed, and touched the side of her jaw. His fingers were warm. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone with a precision that made her think of his handwriting, the way it got larger when he was being honest. This was the largest his handwriting had ever been. Her scent shifted. She felt it happen, the winter mint sharpening, the warmth underneath rising to meet his touch like a tide she had been holding back since the courtyard on day 1. His eyes tracked the change. His pupils blew wide, and the gold in his irises spread until the brown was barely there. "Your eyes," she said. Her voice was not steady. "I know." "You're not managing it." No, he was not managing it. For the first time, Flint and Cedric and the man who wrote first drafts and the king who sent 7th ones, all of them were right here, in his hand on her face, in his breath close enough to feel. "Home," Flint said, not for the first time. But for the first time, Cedric let himself believe it. Eleanor closed the distance. She kissed him. It was not tentative, it was not careful. It was the first draft version, the one she would have written if she'd never learned to edit, the one that said everything she'd been annotating in margins for 15 years. His hand slid into her hair, and her fingers curled into the front of his shirt, and she felt the sound he made against her mouth, low, involuntary, the sound of a man who had been holding something in for 15 years and had just stopped holding it. The world narrowed. His other hand found the small of her back. She leaned into him and his arm tightened, and she could feel his heartbeat through his shirt, fast and unmanaged, and his scent was everywhere, cedar and black tea, and the thing underneath that she now understood was not just scent, but the specific, irreplaceable smell of the only person who had ever read her margins. When she pulled back, his eyes were fully gold. His breathing was uneven. His hand was still in her hair. "Your eyes," she said again, because the first time hadn't been enough. "I know." "Does that happen every time someone kisses you?" "I don't know. No one has ever kissed me after reading my most embarrassing private correspondence." She laughed, the quick, surprised one, the one he'd heard in the garden on day 2 and had been trying to cause again ever since. "The wedding is in 6 days," she said. "Yes. I'm rewriting the vows." "I would expect nothing less. And I want the drafts, all of them, the real ones." "They're yours." "They always were," her wolf observed, from the quiet, certain place it had been sitting for 15 years. "Everything was always yours. You just needed to stop editing." The wedding was not large. Eleanor had won that argument in week 1, and Cedric had not fought it because he was learning, slowly, that some arguments were invitations to pay attention, and some were simply a woman telling you what she wanted. She wore white and gray, and her hair was half up, with strands escaping, and she walked the aisle with the same pace she used on the garden paths, unhurried, unsoftened, certain. Her father, the Alpha of Thornvale, watched from the front row with the composed expression of a man who had shaken hands on this arrangement 25 years ago and was now watching it become something he hadn't dared to hope for. Cedric stood at the front and did not manage his expression and did not try. Harris, standing beside him, watched his king's composure dissolve in real time and had the grace to look at the ceiling. She reached him. He took her hand. His fingers closed around hers, and she felt the warmth of it settle into the same place behind her sternum where it had landed on day 1 in the courtyard, but different now, chosen now. "I revised the vows," she murmured. "How badly." "Your household will need a moment." The vows were traditional in structure and devastating in specifics. She promised to honor his sovereignty and then, without breaking cadence, added that she would continue to correct his grammar for as long as they both lived. He promised to protect her and then added, in the dry, quiet voice that she had learned to translate over 15 years of letters, that he would endeavor to send the first drafts from now on, as the seventh ones had proven to be a waste of both their time. Her father, in the front row, exhaled through his nose and did not quite smile. Margot, 2 rows back, was crying. She would deny this later with complete conviction, and nobody would believe her. The marking happened that night, not in a crowd, not in a ceremony, in their rooms now, the words still new and strange and exactly right, in the lamplight, with the iron-hinged box open on the desk and the drafts beside it. She had stopped taking the suppressants 3 days ago, not because anyone asked, because she was done editing. The full scent of her hit Cedric when he closed the door. Not the filtered version, not the managed one. The first draft. Winter mint. Not through a door anymore, but right here, filling the room, sharp and sweet and devastating. And underneath it, the warm paper and skin smell that the suppressants had been holding back. And underneath that, the thing he had no name for that was just her, just Eleanor, the unedited version of the woman he had been falling in love with through letters for 15 years. Flint went very still. Then, quietly, reverently, "Oh." "I know," Cedric said. "We were not prepared." "No. She is. I know." He kissed the curve of her neck first, slow, giving her time to choose. His breathing was ragged and his hand was in her hair, and Flint was a steady pulse of home, 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 that Cedric no longer tried to quiet. "Are you sure?" he said against her skin, and the low register of his voice, half an octave down, the wolf close to the surface, made her entire body shiver. "I have been sure since letter 62, she said. "I just didn't know it yet." The bite was gentle and certain, and she felt the bond settle into place, not like lightning, not like revelation, but like a letter arriving that she had been waiting for without knowing she was waiting. A warmth that started at her throat and spread down through her chest and her hands and everywhere, as if every letter she had ever written to him and every margin she had ever annotated had been building toward this single, specific point of contact. "Home," Flint said. For the last time, because the word had arrived at its destination and didn't need to be repeated. Her wolf said nothing. Her wolf had known for 15 years. 3 months later, Eleanor found a letter on her desk. It was in his handwriting, the large version, the honest one, addressed in the old formal style they had both long since abandoned. To Lady Eleanor Locke of Thornvale. "Your Majesty," it began. "I write to inform you that the woman who has been annotating my correspondence for the past decade has recently taken up residence in my home, my study, and approximately 90% of my waking thoughts. This is, I am told, what happens when one marries a person whose third paragraphs are better than one's entire legislative record. Enclosed, the rest of the drafts. There were more than you found. The early ones are terrible. The one I wrote when I was 19 uses the word luminous, and I would like it noted for the record that I have since recovered. P.S. The one about your voice was not an exaggeration. P.P.S. The one about the winter mint was also not an exaggeration. I mention this because you are currently sitting 6 feet from me, and you smell like home, and I have run out of drafts to not send you. Cedric." Eleanor picked up a pen. She turned the letter over. In the margin, the only honest place she had ever written, she wrote 2 words. "Prove it." Then she looked at him across the study. He was watching her. He always was. She smiled. Not the devastating one, not the political one, the real one. The one that only existed in person, that no letter could carry, that she had been saving for 15 years for the person who earned it. He had earned it. He stood up, crossed the room, took the letter from her hand, and read what she'd written. And his mouth did the thing, the almost curve, the ghost of something that in a letter would have been his driest, most devastating line, but in person was just a man being helplessly in love with someone who would never, ever stop telling him where he was wrong. "Prove it," he repeated. "Every day," she said, "for the rest of your life." That seems excessive. You used the word luminous when you were 19. You owe me. He kissed her. She let him. Her wolf settled into the warmth of it with the deep, bone-level satisfaction of someone who had been right about everything and had never once needed to say, "I told you so." She had, several times, but she was done now.